Hey, welcome to the AwokenWord podcast. This is your host, Anuj Rastogi. I only have a little bit of housekeeping today, and that is an apology. Leave it to a Canadian to give you an apology. It's been quite some time since I published a new episode. I had been traveling for quite some time around the US and India, had some whirlwind adventures, and just fell behind on a few things. But we do have a number of action-packed episodes and conversations coming up for you. So that's it. That's the only apology you're going to get, I think. My guest today is a woman who can make almost anyone feel small with her incredible graciousness and resilience and sheer sense of compassion. Her name is Lisa Fitzpatrick. And I met Lisa at South by Southwest EDU. Those of you who listened to the last episode with the amazing Darius Baxter will remember that I was out there at South by Southwest EDU. It turns out that Lisa was actually on the same opening keynote panel with Darius, and I met her shortly after that panel and was enthralled by just the little bits of the story that she had shared of hers and her journey on that stage. I didn't know that 24 hours later I'd be having this conversation with her, which was overwhelming to say the least. She is among the first, perhaps even the first, United Methodist Church pastors who's also a woman. Lisa is also the founder of the Apex Youth Center in New Orleans, Louisiana. And this conversation may be one of the most personal and emotional conversations that we've had yet on AwokenWord. The conversation went from the very big to the very small and very proximate quite quickly. We talk a lot about Lisa's own experiences. We talk about an incredibly traumatic, violent incident that she was the victim of, and yet somehow took being a victim and turned it into conquest in changing the world for youth around her. We talk a lot about racism in the world at large and racism in particular in America today. The incredible role that humanity and compassion has played in her life and what she's been able to contribute to the world around her, as well as the incredible need for humanity and compassion in the general day-to-day lives of people today. We also talk about other topics like politics, like the prison industrial complex, which she is very close to feeling the impacts of. It's a very emotional conversation. It's something that I wasn't really prepared for, if I'm honest with you, but I'm very fortunate to have been there. Lisa, thank you so very much for being open, for your time that day, for the conversation that you had, but even more importantly, for all of the work that you do. For everyone listening to this conversation, please do forgive any of the background noise that you hear and the chatter and the talking. Again, keep in mind, this was one of the quietest areas that I could find at South by Southwest EDU in the convention center. There is noise in the background, but it was not an opportunity I wanted to miss in terms of having this conversation with Lisa. So here you have it, my conversation with Lisa Fitzpatrick. This podcast is my humble attempt to bring a full grain of sand of goodness rising to the beach of human experience. Inspiring. This podcast is my love letter to all of you. The AwokenWord podcast. I'm here in Austin, Texas at South by Southwest EDU with an incredible woman, Lisa Fitzpatrick. Lisa, it's good to have you here.
Nice to be here.
I was really touched by your story and feel like only got just a small sliver of what that story is. So for those folks who don't know you, who is Lisa Fitzpatrick?
Lisa Fitzpatrick is a United Methodist pastor, a mother, and the executive director and founder of the Apex Youth Center, a project of Apex Community Advancement.
Okay. And where are you located?
I'm located in New Orleans, Louisiana.
Okay.
In a neighborhood called Central City. Okay. Which, according to FBI statistics, is one of the most dangerous neighborhoods on the planet, and it is the most incarcerated neighborhood on the planet.
Really?
Yes.
So are you originally from Louisiana?
No, I'm originally from Moore, Oklahoma,
Okay.
in South Oklahoma City. I lived there until I was 17. After graduation, I decided to go be a rock star in Los Angeles. That kind of didn't work out for me.
Okay.
And but anyway, my journey has led me around the country and back here.
There was some interesting points in this conversation yesterday with the panel around community and connection and relationship. A lot of those things that seem to be lost and either isolating us from each other or just making the world, I think, a lot less loving and caring than it perhaps used to be at some point in time, and definitely less so than it should be. So what is sort of the backstory on you? Like, you kind of explored a few avenues, and then you've ended up as a pastor and a founder of a youth center in the most, as you're saying, incarcerated vicinity in the United States. How does that happen? What's led to this?
Well, it has been quite a journey. I can tell you that I think what has led to it is listening. I don't do that so well sometimes, but when I do, it seems to be the path that I am supposed to be on when I listen. And I listened to a group of young people who showed up in my living room and found that there was no place to go in New Orleans for teenagers. In fact, it was illegal for teenagers to gather in any place like the mall or places like this, and there was just no place to go. So I listened. I have had what some people would consider a rather circuitous route to my path, but I think that it was all led to this moment. I was actually called to preach when I was 16. I'm 56 years old. That was 40 years ago, almost to the day. It was at a spring revival. And I walked up the aisle on a Friday night. If you know anything about Southern revivals, Friday night's call night, right?
Okay.
Friday night is call night, and that's when they ask if the Holy Spirit is calling you to preach the good news. And I knew that I was being called to do this ministry, and I knew I was being called to minister with young people, and I knew that I was being called to do so as a pastor.
Okay.
I walked up the aisle, and I was quickly ushered to the back.
Okay.
For prayer and counseling, because I was told that this is not for you.
And by for you, not for women?
Not for me, because of the way I was born. Not for me, because I was born a woman.
Okay.
And in my 16-year-old brain, we don't make some of the best decisions. I began to question everything.
Right.
Because I knew, right? And I began to question whether I had gotten anything right.
Right.
So I decided to swing that pendulum, as often a 16-year-old will, way the other way. So I began a different journey.
Okay. And was it unprecedented at that point for women to be pastors in the church?
Yes, it was not only unprecedented, it was not, particularly in the denomination that I was in at the time, it was not allowed.
Okay.
And I don't know why I didn't quite get that message. But so I struggled with that. How did we not have access to it all, right? To not just the ability to receive what I call the good news.
Right.
Love God and love your neighbor as yourself, but to spread that with intention. So I then went to Los Angeles, just packed up my little Camaro as soon as I graduated and headed to LA. Was blessed to just do some things in my life that when you're young, you can do.
Right.
Toured the United States, did some things in the music industry, and came back to Oklahoma when I had my child, my oldest child. After an injury, I could no longer tour, But I began to use what I knew about what I called whole body learning, how we know within ourselves how to do something and experience something before our intellectual brain can sequence and think it out. So I began to use those techniques that I had learned as a musician and a dancer in the public health field. I became passionate about how do we teach this. And I began to work with very high-risk populations. But before that, when I had come back to Oklahoma City from Los Angeles in the mid-'80s to visit my parents, I was a passenger in a vehicle. In my neighborhood, I knew that there was a 7-Eleven right off the freeway. Mm-hmm. And this was in the 80s, in the days of big hair and pantyhose, right?
Sure, yeah.
I hope neither one of those really come back. But anyway, I had reached down. We were going to meet my father for dinner. I had reached down and I had grabbed something, and I had one of those big long 80s nails too, and it just ripped my pantyhose. So I asked my roommate who was with me if she would stop at the 7-Eleven so I could get some pantyhose. As we pulled off of the freeway, a car came up beside of us, and the exterior headlights went off and the interior headlights went on. I looked over and saw two children struggling with something. They were 10, 11 years old, they were young. Whatever it was they were struggling with, it took two of them to lift it up to the window. And because of the world that I lived in, my world didn't even register that danger was happening. Even as I caught a glimpse of something shiny, they were just playing. They were children in the back seat. And as they leaned out the door with this object, because my brain didn't live in that world of fear and that children would shoot someone, instead of ducking, I leaned back to get a better look. And as I turned to my roommate, I said, "What are they?" And before I could get the rest of the words out, the glass shattered. And you heard this shot. It was like this sound, and the car sped off. I have a gap of memory loss at that point. She knew my face was bleeding. I was gratefully only grazed. It was actually the shattering glass that caused more damages. It grazed right under my eye and across my nose and lodged into the transmission, but luckily didn't stop the car. She drove to the 7-Eleven. She tells me that I walked into the 7-Eleven and like nothing had happened. I went to the shelf, grabbed the pantyhose, that the clerk was freaking out.
You were totally in shock.
I guess I was totally in shock. And I'm kind of grateful for that I have this memory gap. Because what I do remember is the children's faces and how really terrified they were. Really terrified. I do have some recollection of getting back in the car because she had called. This was, days before cell phones, right? You had to go to the payphone and you had to dial the operator, and they got a hold of the police. And the police said something. "We're not coming over there right now. We want you to drive across the freeway to the mall, and we'll meet you in the parking lot." What I learned is that they had some intel that there was going to be a gang-related incident that night. I learned that it was probably a gang initiation. I learned later from the gang members I used to work with in Los Angeles when I went into public health, as a young man broke into tears, that he believed it might have been his gang because they were infiltrating Texas and Oklahoma. And what he said was part of that initiation was that if they did not draw blood, see, they didn't believe life mattered. People think that it was about killing someone. It really wasn't.
So was it mistaken identity with you and your roommate in the car?
No, it was intentional because the initiation was to draw blood from a random person.
At age 10?
10 to 11, yeah. You have to be willing to. Now, what I learned, I don't know if I was specifically targeted because at that time I had this big white blonde hair and, that what I have learned from working with many gang members is that it buys silence forever. Especially, because when you kill another gang person, the police don't. Yeah, I've witnessed this in many cases, and this is not in any way to vilify the police. They do an outstanding job.
Right, yeah.
But we know that just by looking at FBI statistics that gang-related murders are often unsolved.
Right.
Sorry, guys.
Young white women murders are always solved, for the most part. There's like a 90% rate on those. If you can draw blood, you buy silence forever. So I don't know if I was specifically targeted, if it was a matter of convenience, where you were, but it was an intentional drive-by, gang initiation. It was shoot a random person day, and I won. So, as my memory was, whatever was going on in my brain at the time, again, I was just doing my routine.
Mm-hmm.
And the police told me, as they did that whole trajectory, it's the days before labor, and they had lasers, they took this stick out, this dowel stick, and they found where the bullet hole was. And they said they didn't know how I was not shot in the side of my head, why I was alive. And I told them what I had done, that it hadn't registered to duck. And they said if I had, I would have been killed. If it would have registered, I would have been killed. Instead, I was wondering what the kids were up to. But it was just this epiphany that I had. I couldn't understand why the children were in that situation. And I never, not for a minute, and I guess I'm grateful for that period of shock, because maybe then I would have been angry, I would have been upset, but I had this moment where the last thing that I had remembered, until I have a brief recollection of the phone call and being there with the police and the EMS. I did not have to go to the hospital. They were able to clean up my wounds and find out that it was but they were able with that rod to see that what now looked at like burn marks, because a graze was actually a burn, as opposed to the cuts from the glass. That was the trajectory of the bullet.
Did you, when you looked over, do you remember making eye contact with either of the boys?
Yes, I did, and I just couldn't figure out what they were doing, why they would have this toy. They were leaning out the window, and their eyes, there was nothing but terror in their eyes.
I can't help but wonder if the very fact that you didn't look away and you actually made eye contact with them, and when they're children, they saw you as a human being, and it was enough to just recoil a little bit or whatever. That that half an inch made a difference.
Oh yes, it was right here under my eye, literally half an inch. It would have been in my.
And sorry, how old would you have been at this time?
I was 24.
So had this been your first brush with gangs and violence? Like, was this sort of the tipping point for you?
It was. I lived in a neighborhood. I knew there were gangs there. And I was a single mom living in what housing I could afford. And I knew there was activity, but had never understood that level of violence. Coming from Los Angeles, I lived very close to South Central and East LA. I lived in Southgate and the Downey area. And so it was all around me, but I never, you you live in a different world. You can live in, one of those things I discovered, you can be on a block away and a world away at the same time. And that was some of the things that I began to understand in that moment. How did we get here? How do we live in a world where 2 children felt like they had to kill or be killed that night?
2 children in the most powerful and wealthy country in the modern era.
We talk often, and that's what I've always felt they were. We talk often about the exploitation in other countries and the recruitment of child soldiers. This is exactly what this was. It was the recruitment of child soldiers under the oppression of extreme poverty with the promise of either protection or death.
Yeah.
We in the United States don't have a moral high ground here as long as this continues. But I did not know that until that moment.
So
gangs were like what was on the TV. You know, they were always in their mid-30s and they'd always looked like the bad guy.
So how do you, what happens from there that turns you towards these young people instead of away from them or against them?
I don't know it, except I just go back to those tiny little faces. I knew I had never considered myself a victim. Now, I will tell you there is still a level of PTSD that I suffer to this day. I hate to ride as a passenger in a car because I'm not in control. My 31 years we've been together, I'm the driver. So I think there's some things that just ingrain in you that you try to overcome, and then you just go, oh, well, I don't need to overcome this. I got bigger things to do. But what brought me to there is this realization that I was not the victim, because I just wasn't. That night, the victims were holding the gun. I was collateral damage in a war that neither one of us started.
You've been working with youth like this, and maybe I'm jumping ahead here a little bit, but you've been working with youth like this for years. What, in your experience, leads to a situation where, primarily, I imagine in most cases, it's young boys and men, that they would go to that length? What is happening in their world that now becomes an option?
If you don't mind, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions.
Sure. Yeah, please.
What are the assets that you value most? The physical assets.
Of my own, or like in my...
Of your own.
Creative thinking, okay. Yeah.
Well, but most people consider their physical assets, and I often ask this question when we're trying to get to the whys, and truly, I don't know the whys. And often I think sometimes we are searching for the whys because then we can say, well, that why doesn't apply to me, so I'm safe. As opposed to, how can we get underneath the why and eliminate the problem? So yes, we need to find the whys, but in a way that we can work together, not as a way to separate us. Often when we search for the why, it's a way to separate us. But one of the things that I've learned from the kids who teach me, from the kids who carry the guns, because I didn't understand it, and I still don't understand it, but I'm beginning to accept it, is that in this United States, in our hyper-materialistic culture, we protect our homes, our family, our cars. It is legal in even the most liberal states that you may protect those assets with deadly force.
Okay.
What if you don't have any of those assets? What if your only asset in the world is what you believe keeps you safe? Because it is our homes and our cars that we feel this sense of safety and security.
Right.
It is within our neighborhood units and our schools that we feel this safe and sense of security if we live in a privileged world. But But if we do not live in that privileged world and we have none of those assets, like I said, even in the most liberal states, you may protect those assets with deadly force. I don't believe in that. If somebody came to me with a gun, I'd say, what do you need? Mm-hmm. Because I'm not going to kill them. I don't believe that any human life, not even is worth whatever object you're after at this moment. But I'm just saying it's not my belief system, but it is ingrained in American culture. But if you have no asset except for what you perceive is your street value, your reputation, then it is absolutely ingrained in our culture that you would protect that with deadly force.
So one of the things that keeps coming up in my world, and I believe is a consistent red thread through every, whether it's inner conflict or conflict within countries or amongst people, is the brokenness of men. I think to an extent all people are broken, Absolutely. But men have this unique ability to spiral into self-destructive behaviors when certain circumstances are around them or certain environmental factors around them. And women, again, this is a sweeping generalization, will more often not resort to violence or the same types of self-destructive behaviors as men will. And if you look at whether it's terrorism or corporate greed or exploitation or gang violence, more often than not, at the end of the day, the architects of that and the executors of that are men. And so if you ask me that question, I don't believe that I would be above those behaviors if I was in that same ecosystem or environment. I don't know. I've never been tested like that, and I'm fortunate to have never been tested like that. So I think that is in all of us, as that ability for good is also, I think, in all people. But what is it that about the young men that you've come across in your life that have gone through these things? Like, what is it that they're feeling that drives them there before they meet you?
One thing that I hear from them over and over again is a profound sense of hopelessness, a profound sense of this is all there is, and a profound sense of if this is all there is and there is no hope, I at least need to show I am a quote-unquote man. Mm-hmm. And I think that this toxic environment that we've put our young men and boys in as a society, these expectations, we speak of toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
Toxic masculinity is not just a poison against women, it's also poisons the very men that possess it.
Yes.
Because poison is poison, and it kills anything it touches.
Yeah.
And so, I'm, as a mother of both boys and girls, I see it affecting both. I see these expectations of behaviors from both my sons and daughters that society places on them. Mm-hmm. And it's poisoning both. So when we first started doing the work and we went around the neighborhood, we found something absolutely even more unique in New Orleans, Louisiana, post-Katrina. That all of my curriculum that I developed in Los Angeles working with gang members for 10 years that I was not expecting. When I worked with gang members in Los Angeles, this is what they taught me. They taught me that this is where I learned that we're not all on this journey and some are further ahead than others. Mm-hmm. Pardon my language, that's just BS.
Sure.
Okay?
Yeah.
Because we're not all on the same journey. We're not supposed to be on the same journey. But what I did learn is that we are all on a journey. And it's incumbent upon us, if any of us are going to truly move ahead and stay ahead, that we need to link arms and move together. I learned that we all, as human beings, the basic core of what we want, and David spoke of this in different words yesterday,
he did, yes. Yeah.
That even when he speaks with people who we've labeled as terrorists and the bad guy, we all want a better today than we had yesterday and a better tomorrow than we had today. Mm-hmm. Now, I didn't always agree with how my students in the 90s were going to tame that. They wanted to be, head of this gang, and they wanted to move up to be the landlord of, 7th Street. And by the way, landlord just means you get to assign who gets to, what drug territory. But not landlord like we think of it.
Hey, they're all collecting,
yeah,
I guess.
It's all collecting,
yeah.
And you're all assigning real estate. And so it was a beautiful thing to learn, and we were able to build upon that. When I moved to New Orleans post-Katrina, I would say, where do you want to be in 5 years? And even to gang, previously I would say that, and they would say, I want to move up in the gang, I want, buy my kids a big house, I want to get more money. Clearly, half of the young men we spoke to, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Half looked at me with eyes that were blank and said, on a t-shirt. If you know anything about New Orleans and Southern culture, when you are on a t-shirt, that's where they saw themselves. It means your funeral has been preached. These were kids as young as 14 and 15. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? On a t-shirt. So we had another level of absolute, there is nothing for me. Again, in Central City, in the last 5 years, it's the last 10 years actually. Louisiana just moved out of the number 1 incarcerated state.
Right.
Oklahoma beat us, but that's only because of some machinations. But we were, our country is the most incarcerated country in the world. Louisiana at the time, up until last year, was the most incarcerated state in the most incarcerated country in the world. New Orleans was the most incarcerated city in the most incarcerated state in the most incarcerated country in the world. And my neighborhood, Central City, still is the most incarcerated neighborhood on the planet. Fully 50% of males over the age of 18 have been incarcerated, are on papers or parole, coming out of jail, or are in prison and list an address.
What's the
That's hopelessness.
what's the demographic breakdown? Are these primarily black neighborhoods?
Yes, Central City is predominantly an African American neighborhood.
When you say half of the young men there would be incarcerated, would that be consistent across Latinos, blacks, whites there as well, or is this a unique situation within one community?
Up until the last 2 years, now we're dealing with gentrification and displacement.
Sure.
But up until 2 years ago, the neighborhood was more than 90% African American. So we're dealing with a 53% unemployment rate among males, which coincides with your, because you can't get it. You do your time, whether it's 1 month or 10 years, you still can't get a job when you come out, or you've lost your job. So it's predominantly African American community.
Not that being Canadian puts Canada in any position of being on a high horse or having the moral high ground, because every country has got its own demons, and skeletons in its closet. But to an extent that the prison system here is an industry, and that it is entirely motivated by profit and market forces to incarcerate people, not for the purposes of changing society or cleaning up society, but specifically to make, whether it's 50 or 60,000, whatever it might be from state to state, for having a prisoner in there. If the system is built around that, then every prisoner that goes through it is just another commodity, is another cog, is a disposable asset, right? So this doesn't surprise me, because there's all of the environmental factors that kind of create and breed and continue to perpetuate crime. And then you have a system that's just waiting with open arms to take them in, with no regard for destroying the rest of their life. So if this is, I don't know if you share a similar view on this, but to me, I wonder, how does a system like this continue if people are aware that this is what the system actually does?
How does it continue? It continues because it's incredibly profitable for a very powerful few. I believe that the prison industrial complex is our new slavery. I believe that it is one of the most evil forces upon the face of this earth. I'm just going to call it out like it is. I'm sure I'm going to get a call from somebody somewhere in my church if this... But I've said it from the pulpit, and I will say it in the podcast. It is one of the most evil forces I have ever personally encountered. I have a former foster son. I'm really the only person he can call mom, right? He, first offense, young African-American, strong athlete, right? Mm-hmm. Barely before his 18th birthday, grabbed his cell phone back from the two kids who had stolen it the day before. They made a claim he had a gun and shot it up in the air. No gun was found, no residue on him, no evidence. He was convicted and sentenced to 18 years without parole on a first offense. I don't even know where he is right now because he has been traded on the market of, because he is an athlete, he's a boxer, and he's a hard worker. They trade him among correctional centers in Louisiana as a commodity. And I don't know where he is at any given moment.
When was the last you saw or spoke to him?
We spoke about 2 months ago. He had gotten indication he was getting ready to be moved. He has called his girlfriend, and we're trying, but see, now I can't call him because I'd put all his money on his card at that prison. Well, they take all that, and they don't transfer it to the new place. It is the biggest racket cost me $1 a minute to talk to him.
How did we get here? Like, how?
This is the question I've been asking since those two babies pulled that gun. How did we get here? And what can we do to shift it, to change it, to move that needle somehow, some way? How did we get here? Because slavery was outlawed, so we figured out some other way to do it legally. We're always doing machinations like that, trying to, get off on a technicality. I think that's what we've done.
I want to ask you this, and feel free to decline. But if they were not young black men, would we still be in this place to an extent, or is it just that we've said we're kind of in that post-racial era? These just happen to be the troubled people, and we're just going to ignore it.
So I don't believe we're in a post-racial era at all.
Neither do I, for the record. Yeah, no, we are far from it.
I absolutely believe it has something to do with the color of their skin, because I can watch from my window young white college students buy the same drugs as young black men, and the only ones being arrested, the young white college students might get arrested and get a ticket and a note home to their mom. My kids go to jail. That's the reality of the situation. It is, go to NOLA.com, look at the crime stories just from the last week. 2 white men stole $350,000 from their boss. They got probation. A young black man stole $90 and got 11 years. It's blatant. Mm-hmm. So yes, I believe it does. Now, I have a little bit different view. So I have 2 definitions. I believe that we all possess and are capable of prejudice.
Sure.
We all prejudge.
Agreed.
We see somebody and we've had an experience before and we prejudge. The actual racism, I believe, is instituted. It is impacted by people in power. And in the United States, I am not sure that a person of color can actually be racist, because I believe that word is an institutional word. It's just a definition.
Yeah, definition.
I think we might be defining the word different. And I think if there was a country that was where the people in power didn't look like me, then there could be institutional racism against people who look like me. Although my experience in those countries when I've traveled is not.
Right.
It is distinctly different. And my children of color, my own flesh and blood children of color, are treated differently than my white children. I see it in the malls, I see it in the stores we go in, I see it. I see it in their eyes when my daughter, when she was 15, went to go get some lipstick and instead was detained. And when I walked in the door, the woman said, "Oh, you're her mother? Well, you know how they are. I needed to make sure she wasn't stealing." Said this in front of my child. So yes, it is institutionalized. It is sanctioned in our very systems.
What?
Sorry, I start preaching for a minute. I'm sorry.
No. This is what. I'm curious how you end up on the realizations that you've had, and millions upon millions of other people don't. Two people could have had the exact same set of circumstances up until your night on that freeway, and you would have walked away going 180 degrees differently on that same situation, right? Like someone would walk away with hate or anger or increased levels of prejudice or whatnot, but you didn't. What made the difference for you?
So part of that is my experience. It's the breadth and the depth of my experience, and all these experiences layered upon each other. The two children who shot me were Latino. I was the single mother of a beautiful Latina daughter. I couldn't impose, and half of my family, like I have a whole branch of my family who is from Latin America. So I guess in my experience, it didn't occur to me to impose that experience upon their heritage and their ethnicity and their race. I believe that in that moment, my faith tells me to see the Christ in all, and it can be really difficult sometimes for me to see the Christ in people who are, as we say in the South, just being ugly for ugly's sake.
Sure, yeah.
But these layered experiences, I was blessed to be in a family and blessed to have two grandmothers that never saw the world as binary. There was tons of fuzzy lines for both of them. And learned from them. So yeah, I think it's the layered experience and the listening. I've always tried to be a listener. I know right now I'm a talker, but I've always
tried to... You have much to share.
I've always tried to listen to what God is saying, what the Holy Spirit is saying, and what the Christ in all of us might be trying to relay. Now, I am not a person who believes that it is God's will. To this day, I don't believe it's God's will that either those two babies shot me or that I got shot. So I'm not a believer like that in this predestined, everything happens for a reason. What I do believe is that we can take these experiences. Back to your question, that's what drives me. What can we, us together, recreate out of this chaos and destruction?
Well, especially considering that we created the chaos and destruction.
Yes.
It didn't just exist independently.
No. God called it good, so it was good, right? We are good. I also don't believe that we are.
We're also complex, though.
Yes.
Yeah.
But we were created good. So we need to find that in us each and every time.
You had shared this story of teenagers just showing up at your house, and this sort of led to this next chapter. And I'm curious if you can kind of just talk about what that circumstance was, because I do want to get into your work with Apex, which sounds incredible, but everything so far is coming from your own very intimate, personal experience. These don't seem like academic exercises where you saw some neighborhood with kids that were struggling and you figured you could help out. Like, you've sort of not even lived on the periphery, but you've lived through the consequences of this chaos. So I'm curious how you've navigated yourself through that. Like, these kids show up at your door, now what happens?
So I kind of moved myself up that corporate ladder in public health to the C-suite. I always call it up to the corner office with the view and the window I wanted to jump out of every day, because it's not why I got into healthcare to, push papers around. I wanted to be with people. Moved to New Orleans, bought a big house. My husband called himself a kept man because he had retired and he was Mr. Mom. And we had 4 children, took in 4 foster children almost immediately. It was just how we were living. We had dreamed that one day, 20 years from then, this was 10 years ago, I would retire and we might do a youth center. We'd even picked out the name, this Apex, always pursuing excellence.
Be careful what you wish for.
I know,
yeah.
I know. And right, and be careful what you make a plan for, because I think God laughs. So, because we had a plan, right? Mm-hmm. We had a careful plan. And we moved in, and what we didn't know about New Orleans is a block-by-block city. And you see, the way the realtor took us in every single time to our house was through the blocks of the big houses that had been built 100 years ago. What we didn't know was that our house was literally the last house before this turn with this other block. And this block was where all the shotgun houses were built 100 years ago for those who would serve in the larger houses.
And these houses are all still standing?
Yeah. And so New Orleans does this. It has these block-by-block cities. This neighborhood I described to you earlier, Central City, is literally one of the poorest zip codes. If you live in this neighborhood, in these addresses, you automatically qualify for free lunch, because it's not worth the paperwork to figure out the 3 people who don't, right? Mm-hmm. So it's 3 blocks away from St. Charles Avenue, which is one of the wealthiest avenues in America. So this is how New Orleans is laid out, because it's a 300-year-old city before modern transportation. Everyone had to live close by.
Right.
So I didn't know this. So these were the kids that were showing up, were from this other block. And then they would tell people from the other blocks, further into this.
And sorry, forgive me, not to be crass, but
it's okay.
Is it still the case now that block by block you would have predominantly black families, people living in one block, and then you'd have predominantly perhaps more white, but at least more upper class or middle class families?
Yes.
The echoes of history are playing out.
Absolutely.
Even now.
Yes. And if you superimpose the old plantation lines,
wow,
you'll see where the big house was and where the quarters were.
How do we move on from history when we haven't left it?
I know. And come to my neighborhood one time. I'll take you on a walk and you'll see where the red line was. It's instantly visible.
I would love to take you up on that. We've never been to New Orleans.
Anytime.
I would love to.
It is, when I take people on a neighborhood walk, it is instantly visible where the red line used to be, the mortgage line where they would write mortgages or not write mortgages. So these are the kids that showed up. They saw us move the video games in. They saw our eclectic family move in, and like I said, 2 boys showed up the next day, asked if they could help unpack any boxes and play video games with my sons. But I knew that they hadn't come because I had these 2 teenage daughters. Right?
Sure.
And they'd come to check out my teenage daughters because they're boys, right? And I got beautiful daughters.
And they had a story. They figured it out. They put some thought into this.
Yeah, they did. They had a plan. I got to admire them for that. I'm like, yeah, honey, you did not come to play with my 5 and 6-year-old boys because you're 16. But it was okay, you know. I was raised that way. Like my grandmothers, we were the Kool-Aid house, and mother was always like, you know, whatever. You know, we were just the house kids played at. And like I said, they invited a couple of their friends, and we moved in on Thanksgiving. By the first week of January, that was the week I looked around and counted 35 noses all coming in and out of my den on a Saturday.
Wow.
But then I discovered things. One thing they were coming for was to eat. We were just grilling hot dogs. Like, just grab some more hot dogs out of the freezer, put some more on the, grill. Because that was basically the only meal they were getting all weekend. Chips and soda maybe from the gas station. There was no stores around. Mm-hmm. I mean, I felt the store was close coming from California.
Sure.
I drove 3 miles to go to the grocery store. But if you're on a bus and that's a bus transfer and 3 miles, that's a long way to go for a grocery store at the time, right? So I didn't know these things. This is what my kids all would teach me, right? You know? So we just started this, and that's when I would ask them, you know, well, why are you hanging out with this old woman? And so that Saturday, when I counted, and he looked at me and he said, because you're the first person to ever open the door. And again, how did we get there? How did we get there? Like, it didn't occur to me to lock the door on Saturday because it would just be exhausting getting up to answer it all the time.
How did your neighbors react to this?
Well, I'm blessed. I don't know. There are some things that I believe that when we listen, God puts us in the right place. So I believe we listened and got put in the right place because we had these wonderful next door neighbors, Tommy and Carol. That's who actually came out to greet us. One reason why we decided to move there was because they saw us looking at the house, came out to greet us, and just bragged on the neighborhood and how wonderful it was and loving. And so we were like, yeah, let's do the house with the great neighbors.
Sure, yeah.
So Tommy and Carol are retired, and they were there, and they would end up coming over and let's chip in on some hot dogs, okay? Because they'd see all these kids coming over, kids that they loved, you know? Mm-hmm. So we were really blessed.
Shout outs to Tommy and
Shout
Carol.
outs to Tommy and Carol. Even to this day, they're just right there with us all the time, even though we don't live in that house anymore. So we decided, okay. We started talking to a little church, and the vicar around the corner was like, how do you get all these kids? I've been trying to get kids over to church. I go, well, you can't just invite them to church. If you feed them, they will come. So we started taking turns, and we would go do the hot dogs in the church lot and play outdoor, stand lot. He'd let us use that so we started playing outdoor games and doing stuff at the church, and then we'd go back on our house on the other side. So we'd go back and forth, right? And then I would just tell the kids to say, okay, anybody who wants to come to church, just show up on my porch on Sunday morning. We'd have to take 2-3 carloads. 17-year-old boys. Why are you coming to church with me? First person ever asked.
They just needed to be asked.
They just needed to be asked.
Needed to be
they
let in.
They needed an open door and let in, asked. So they started talking about what if we could do this. So we talked to the church, and we wanted to do a summer camp. Let me know if I'm going too long. But we're going to do a summer camp. And the summer camp, so the church, all the little old ladies got together. Oh, we're going to do this, you know. And you think we can get about 10 kids? I go, I'll spot you 10 kids out of my living room, you know. So we ended up having 85 kids enrolled.
Wow.
Over half signed up for the 13 to 17-year-old junior counselor program because, you know, you're way too cool for summer camp once you reach 13.
Sure.
But you're not too cool to be the boss.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but that also told us the teenagers were they were willing to wipe the snotty noses of 5-year-olds for 6 weeks out of their summers, 6 hours a day, than be on the street. So, after the summer, we were thinking, oh yeah, well maybe one day we'll do a youth center. September, I tried to come home from my job, and I couldn't because it was tape everywhere. And when I finally found a back way in, yellow tape, yellow police tape, when I finally found a way in, I came to the house, and my daughter's best friend, Ashley, was sobbing, collapsed in Alexa's arms. And I found out that her cousin, a young man who would come occasionally, had been killed in a driveway, random drive-by. Only the bullet didn't miss the temple this time. A gang had come blazing down the street, another just random, we're going to shoot anybody because we can, because it was an initiation. He had been killed on the corner, line of sight with our house. And I brought Danny home. I went home, brought all the kids. We had 8 kids in the house at the time, the 4 foster kids and our 4 kids. Sat everybody in the living room and said, I don't think we have 10 years. We got to do this now. The whole family agreed. We knew it would drastically change our lifestyle. Within 3 days, we had incorporated. I had no idea, still to this day, have no idea what I'm doing, how to run a nonprofit. It drastically changed our lifestyle. Nobody would fund us because they wanted me to pick and choose who walked in the door because they could pick and choose the outcome. It's still a struggle to this day. We had to sell our house and our cars and our furniture and to support the center. The little church let us be there for a while. It is still a struggle. Now I will make full confession that they were going to do it the thing last night, and we had to furlough all of our employees last month. And for now, the center is closed, and it's back at my house because we lost all our 2019 funding because people love what we do. But the last sorry but letter said something about liability and worried about some of their corporate responsibility. It was all just veiled lawyer speak for, we want you to pick and choose who comes in the door.
Because they're trying to improve the outcomes, at least on paper.
Yes. And there's got to be room for a trauma center. That's all I got to say. Back in my healthcare field, it's why trauma centers keep closing, because insurance companies don't want to fund them. And I will tell you, in the last 10 years, we've counted more than 40,000 hours of volunteer times our kids have given. I'll put that up against any fancy, well-funded program ever. We have transformed a neighborhood. Everywhere we go, a donut hole appears in the murder map. They've even tried to do a study. All they will say is, correlation is not causation, and I know that. I know I'm in the medical field, right? Yeah. They don't know why it happens, but it happens. Because New Orleans has a murder map, and that pinpoints, and a donut hole forms around it. The people who did it, NOLA.com, pointed it out to us one day. Said, you moved from here to there, and the donut hole opened over there.
Yeah, and correlation may not be causation only because you haven't yet found the causal relationship.
How do you double blind that? Right,
yeah.
Except that I will literally have what we call in our neighborhood OGs, the older drug dealers, grab a young man by his ear and bring them to me. Oh, he's trying to make a buck running for me, and I told him, nope, this stops with us. They stop, again, the incarceration, they got to feed their families. Until I can offer a job to them, they got to feed their babies. But they're determined that the next generation won't.
There's this thing that I've been thinking about for a long time, and I'm not the first. Many people have been talking about this, but the incentive structures that we have in the world and in society feel completely upside down. So on one hand, we can continue to find public money to fund private prisons. Mm-hmm. We can continue to have this recurring debate around should there be guns, should there not be guns, should there be registries, should there not be registries. large publicly traded corporations can get all kinds of money from the government when the time comes for either massive bailouts or tax cuts. And yet, here you are doing all of the actual work, all the blood, sweat, and tears to make a difference that is now undeniable, even anecdotally, I'm sure, to speak to any of the kids, and young people have been through, cross paths with you, right to, what you're talking about with the murder map. And somehow society cannot orient itself to have money for that. The thing that actually has a net positive impact on everything. Like, I wonder, why is it so difficult to do the right thing? Is it because there's so much money in the wrong thing that they want to make it more difficult to do the right thing? I can't understand how, after your story and history and all the proof that you have, that it would be difficult to still raise money.
This story scares people to death.
Why?
And I asked the same question, so I've asked them, why does this scare you? People admire you, but they don't want to be a part of something that is so frightening. It's like all the movies we see about the movements, it's about the civil rights movement. Mm-hmm. There's a reason there's 30 years before the movies started coming out.
Sure.
Because there's distance. But the people who are writing the movies and doing the movies and admire the movement, how many of them or their parents actually risked marching across the bridge? Mm-hmm. So how do we shift that dynamic? Oh my gosh, if I had the answer to that, our budget is so low. Remember, I have 9 children. I know how to stretch a pot of red beans, okay? Our budget is, our ideal budget is $395,000 a year. We serve, a slow day is 40 to 50 kids. A busy day might be 80 to 100. Events, 250 to 2,000 people come to our events to get food and, because we partner with other people and we do these things. We've never had an insurance claim, not a workers' comp claim, not an insurance claim. A lot of bruised egos on the basketball court, but
Sure. Yeah.
We have had 52 documented active shooter, not drills, active shooter lockdowns on our premises since we've opened.
52.
52 means there's an active shooter within 4 blocks, or we've heard shots fired, or we've ducked before the bullets have come in the window. We have never had a child hurt in our center because I run my hospital protocol in our lockdown. Everybody has a lockdown procedure. It's just now known because of the recent events. Mm. And when we've expanded into the new center, we had 7, I think, in the first 90 days, and now we have maybe 1 every 6 months, and that's because we get an alert that there's an active shooter within, and they're now they're 6 blocks away, not across the street away. Never had a child hurt. Never had an incident at the center. Broken up a couple of fights. We have maybe 2-3 fights a year. I'll put that up against any school, public, private.
Yeah.
I got teenage boys and girls, and they're gonna tussle. I'm the one that breaks up the fights. I don't allow my employees to. Which tells you that if I can break up a fight between 2 very large 16-year-old boys, yeah, they're not really in it. So I'm just saying all this to say, the answer to your question, we are doing amazing work. My kids are doing amazing work. What I do every day, and I think this is where the disconnect is with the funders, and this is what I tell them. I tell them the truth. This is what I do every day. I unlock the gate. I hand out cookies and a meal, and the kids do the work. But see, funders want the name on something. They want to know that they have done something to save somebody. And I get that.
The ego.
I get that, and okay, put your name on it. I don't care. But acknowledge that our kids are doing amazing things. Amazing.
It just, I mean, let's just round it to 400,000 a year. That's eight kids entering the prison system in a year, basically being paid out by the state.
Yeah.
I don't think this is a uniquely American situation. I mean, maybe the specific nuance and context is, but I think this happens in many countries, that even public money isn't available to the public.
Right.
In a supposedly free market world, these enterprises should be left to their own devices, but instead we are constantly, in some way, shape, or form, bailing them out or paying for something, and yet here you are doing something that is transformational. You had talked about something that I thought was really nuanced around creating, there was a statement, I'm paraphrasing what I heard yesterday, around preventing competition from becoming conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And there was this idea that you were kind of sharing with me yesterday around putting things in close proximity of each other. I'm curious to understand, like, what is it that you do that teaches these young people these life skills?
So Apex is very intentionally structured to look unstructured. Because the child, the young adult who's going to walk in off the street and seriously decide, oh, no guns, I need to go put this away and come in, they are not going to opt in to a quote-unquote program.
Right.
It's just not something that's going to happen. And quite frankly, I'm not either. I don't like to be programmed. I'm not like sign me up for that program. That's not me. So I get that. That's one thing I have in common with my kids. And so we needed to find a place, and this is, again, what our kids taught me. I don't know. Being a former musician, I thought it was going to kind of look like an episode of Glee. Trust me, it does not. Not at all. Singing and dancing. But the kids taught me, this is what, I said, what we'll do, and I would go to parks and I would say, like, walk right up to the kids smoking weed in the thing. I'd go, what will make you put that down and come inside? You got a pool table with no quarters? I'll get you a pool table with no quarters. You got cold drinks? I'll get you cold drinks. These were things that we talked to the neighbors. So it needed to look like it wasn't a program. Like it was a place just to sit and breathe for a minute. Get the noise of the street out of your head for a moment.
It's that simple.
It's that
Cold
simple.
drinks and a pool table.
Cold drinks and a pool table is how we started. And a couple of really bad video games because they were donated because
Sure.
people didn't want them anymore. So we play nonviolent video games. I just tell people, I'm honest with the kids. Look, I've been shot. First-person shooter games trigger me. So as a favor to me, don't bring any in. Okay. There's no like they're glad to help. Oh yeah, I feel you. I've been shot too. It kind of bothers me. So yeah, it's cool.
Is there any hesitation that these kids feel in first coming across you? Like, is there, I don't know what their experiences may have been with white America, previous to you, and then they meet you. What do they make of you? Like, what do you hear from them?
So some of them absolutely don't trust me at first. But of the 1,200 kids who've come through our program, more than 95% of them have been referred by another student, not recruited by me or assigned by the court or sent over from school. So that trust level is, and then the kids will introduce them to me, and so there's a level of trust that is established vicariously through the person that they trust.
Right.
And that is also intentional. When a new kid does come in because he's following the crowd, the first thing I do after handing him in cookies, ask him if he has any weapons, checking in any gang colors, because we don't have colors inside. But we have a place you can put them because maybe you need to be safe in your neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And I call one of the kids that I think they might know from their school, because we sign in, look at the school, up, and that's who leads them and shows them the rules of Apex. I don't tell them the rules of Apex because that's just not cool.
Right.
But everything in the center is intentionally placed. The pool table is just a little too close to the ping pong table, which is just a little too close to the the game station they use for Just Dance, which is just a little, and the basketball game station is just a little too close to the piano. So if you want to hear both, you got to kind of cooperate. You got to know how to use the soft thing on the piano and play at different points. Mm-hmm. And when I have volunteers come in, they're like, "Oh, well, let me help you arrange this because you can't." I go, "No.
No, there's a reason.
There's a reason for this, because we want the kids to walk in and go, "Wow, look at all this I got to play with. I can do anything." I go, "Yeah, just take turns. Like, if there's a line waiting for this, then talk to the volunteer. There's a roster you guys can use." But I put them in charge of it. 15, you have to limit yourself if there's a line, or, you got to start running, winner plays next or something,
Sure, yeah.
So in other words, you guys set the rules, but abide by them. And here's some sheets for you, different rules you can set. We do the same thing on the basketball court. Call out your rules first. Are you playing NCAA? Are you playing NBA? Mm-hmm. You playing street ball? Are you playing modified street ball? Which means street ball, but here's some extra things we're going to do. Call out your rules. You set the rules. And everyone has agreed upon them, and now you're going to follow them. And that's the same thing with the rec center, with the rec room. Everything is just a little too close. There's all kinds of things to do. So if everyone wants to take advantage of all the assets that are available in the space, couldn't the world use a little bit of this? If everyone wants to take care of all of the assets that are available to all of us, wouldn't it behoove us to cooperate? And now nobody has to mark a territory, because if we just communicate and cooperate, we can dance. The pool table and the ping pong table can just dance a minute.
Yeah, it takes...
It's very intentional.
No, it's brilliant. Introducing situations of low risk conflict that you now have to resolve. These are skills that we don't master as adults. Everyone's competing as if they're competing for scraps all the time.
But once you've mastered that, now, it might take, some kids it takes them a couple of days, some kids it takes them a couple of years. Now that noise is out of your head. You've got that skill.
There's something beyond that skill. There's also a norm that you're setting that's established across that community. David spoke quite articulately about, relationships don't necessarily scale, but norms do. Mm-hmm. So if the norm in your area or community or country or whatnot is just to take, right? Because you don't know when you're going to get it the next time, or you just want to amass this empire of stuff for whatever reason. Someone willing to wait a little bit to give you a turn means they're probably never going to get their turn. So now they're operating from this scarcity mindset, fight or flight as well. But if you have this mutual respect for each other, that we're all going to play by these rules, we are going to work this out. I am going to get my turn. I'm going to give you your turn. That norm allows you to kind of guide that dynamic. But if you don't have that norm and you don't trust the other person, which that's the reality of today, we just don't trust each other. But it sounds like you're creating new norms, which is amazing, because if you have, how many kids have been through?
1,200.
You've got 1,200 human beings who've gone through and established amongst themselves and probably reinforced those norms in the circles of people that they're around, which is amazing.
It's really cool to watch in the neighborhood too. It's really cool to watch the kids, like, in the front porch, squash a beef. That's the vernacular we use.
Sure, yeah.
Like, man, there's no reason to do that. Look, there's plenty, or watching, having a mom call me and go, my kids are like playing together again. But they did that. But it's giving them I don't know. I think maybe all of us can learn from this in a hyper-structured atmosphere. We have no power of choice. Now, there's boundaries at Apex. We have firm boundaries, which gives the kids this freedom to create.
Sure.
That transcends, like, I know I'm not going to fall off the cliff because there's a boundary there. So now I can be free to choose. Because the boundaries are established and I have this freedom within boundaries. And they push the boundaries. Absolutely they do, because that's their job.
Sure.
Because they're teenagers.
Yep.
And that boundary's always moving as a teenager. It's getting a little wider all the time. Our job, if we do it well, is to let them know where that boundary is, let them know when to loosen it a little bit, you know. We have what we call next level, or we had before we're not at the center right now, next level programming where kids can opt in to go upstairs. Now those are your structured programs. It's your computer job training, your dance studio, your,
Sure.
you know, you really whoop somebody's behind on the Just Dance, and now you're ready to go with coach upstairs. And I'm not gonna do this, right? Some kids will be ready for that right away. Some kids are not. Where are you in your space? We have a basketball team that has to practice, that goes to the tournaments, but you don't have to be on the team to opt into the free play and the other tournaments. Okay. Those are when you're ready. Some kids, again, ready by day 2. I'm ready for the team. I'm ready for the program. I'm ready for the lesson, right? Some kids need a minute. I was one of the kids that needed a minute, so.
How do we, beyond the particular moment you find yourself in with Apex right now, how do we see more of this happen? How do we get the sentiment that motivates you pervasive in society? Like, what do we need to do to get there?
Listen. Back to that first thing I said. Whether you're an individual, a church, an organization, unlock your doors. There's a world of young people out there, phenomenal young people out there, who have been labeled something that they're not. Put a plate of cookies out. Grill a few hot dogs in your front yard. Listen. They're amazing. It will feed your soul. Don't do it to save anybody unless you need it to save yourself, because that's, this has saved me. I don't think I've saved anybody except maybe me. But giving that space for our kids to blossom. Our kids go to charter schools where they have to walk on lines to class and be silent at lunch, and we're wringing our hands why they don't have the social skills, because we don't allow them the opportunity. Co-create. We've got kids going into computer science who believed they were going to jail because they were told they weren't good at math. But man, I'd watch them on the court and your geometry is off the charts, okay? Because that's what it takes. But they'd never had an opportunity to be in a space where they could associate that.
Right. Apply it in their own way.
Right. Artists, and we've got a recording studio, and kids thought they were failing in English. I go, why are you failing in English when you're a poet? I'm not a poet. So I saw that rap you just did. That's poetry. Mm-hmm. One kid had a line, told him to copyright it, so it's copyrighted, smoking my Medicaid. Yeah, because you're ADHD and you can't get your medicine, and your money ran out because of So amazing works are coming out from our kids. But see, they've been listening to the wrong people. They've been listening to what the world tells them. They have been listening to the movie posters that says, oh yeah, I look like the bad guy. They've been listening to the television and the news. But when they have a chance to just listen to themselves, get the noise of the street out of their head, the noise of the bullets and the noise of the war that's going on, that they didn't start, but they're caught up in. Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh.
It's an accident of birth that they've ended up on that block, in that city, in that circumstance. Like it's a roll of dice that we end up where we do.
And now I live in the neighborhood like I don't live on the edge on the block where I lived. I live smack in the middle of the neighborhood because after we lost the house, the only place we can afford is there. Although now I'm unemployed, but so we just live together and we work together, and we're going to figure out the next thing together.
What can people do who might be listening to this to help?
You can go to our website, apexyouthcenter.org. You can help. And if you can't help Apex Youth Center, help Dion, who came to me after I had to announce at church that we were probably closing and we're going to have to give back the keys. And he looks at me and he pounds his chest and he said, "Can't nobody close Apex, Miss Lisa?" I said, "Honey, it looks like that's what's going to happen." He goes, "Nope, because Apex is not a place. Apex now lives in us. Can't nobody close it." So Dion, a 19-year-old boy who, oh my gosh, we have this try again tomorrow thing, like when you mess up, you're going to have to try again tomorrow. Dion was first year he was there, he was a multiple try again tomorrow, right? And he doesn't care if I tell a story. He has started a mini Apex out of his house. Buy him some cookies, for God's sake.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that, and just thank you for doing what you're doing. We need to align our worldly actions with that feeling somehow. I can't understand how people look at kids of any color or in any situation and see them as dispensable, especially someone who's a parent that supposedly loves their own child. I don't get that. Somehow, some way, we have to figure out how to connect and empathize with people, even if you don't understand or agree with where they're coming from. But maybe it's just cookies. It seems so simple. Lisa, thank you. I'm touched, humbled that you chose to spend some time talking with me. I think that whatever I can do to kind of help spread the word, and whatever positive energy and goodwill I have to kind of spread the word, I think you are an absolute inspiration. And every one of the kids and the people that you're working with is an inspiration along the way. And I think you've kind of shown people that we have the power to create our reality and not just be victims to it, because I think that's an easy trap to fall into for so many of us. Your website again is?
apexyouthcenter.org.
Okay, amazing. Thank you, Lisa. That's a wrap.
Thank you.
If you'd like to support the AwokenWord podcast, there are many ways you can do it. You can subscribe in your app of choice. We're on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, or TuneIn, for example. The biggest thing that you can do is rate this podcast and leave your review in iTunes or wherever you listen to it. You can also talk about this podcast, its guests, or the ideas shared on it in your own podcasts. If you find benefit in this show, tell your friends, tell your family, and even more importantly, tell your enemies. They'll appreciate it too. And of course, you can also follow us on social media, particularly on Twitter. Our handle there is @AwokenWord, on Instagram as @AwokenWord Podcast, or on our Facebook page. Thank you. Your support is greatly appreciated.